bakit tayo mga ita, kakulay natin ang lupa? Kaya ba marumi ang tawag nila sa akin?
Ang taong madumi ay ang taong hindi malinis ang puso.
Sino yan? Ba't ganyan suot niya?
Norman! Palitan
Ilan taong mo na suot yan ha? Pabili ka na ng bago.
Yan na lang lagi isinusuot mo!
Nay, baka pwede mo nang palitan. Mga kaklase ko puro bagong suot.
Gusto mo ba na itago na mahirap lang tayo? Alin ang karapat dapat hangaan? Isang taong madali ang buhay o isang taong dumaan sa matinding kahirapan?
Asti,
Mukha siyang authentic.
Oh, ba't ganyan itsura mo?
Usutuma, ganito rin ang afro ng mga basketballista sa TV.
Hindi ganyan ang tunay na buhok ng ita.
Pero mas pinapansin ako ng mga kaklase ko ngayon.
Kailangan ba talagang magbago para lang matanggap ka ng ibang tao?
Mr. Norman King.
Ang turo sa akin ng nanay ko, kapag natanggap ko na kung sino ako, mas malayo ang mararating ko. Ako si Norman King. Ipinagmamalaki kong ako'y isang aitang Pilipino.
Do you think culture greatly affects our identity? Despite contracting identities, what makes ourselves unique? In this lesson, Q will learn about what is the perspective of anthropology towards self. Let us define anthropology. Anthropology came from the Greek word anthropos, which means human, and logos, which means study. It is a study of all the aspects of human conditions. According to Kotak 2009, it also examines the biology, interactions in society, language, and culture. Anthropology explores interconnectedness and interdependence of human cultural experiences in all places and age. In short, it connects and interlinks all culture across the world. This kind of broad and holistic perspective of anthropology helps anthropologists explain human nature. These are the two concepts of human nature in anthropology. First, biological. Second, cultural entity. The traditional anthropological understanding of the self is that the self is an animal species that underwent the process of biological evolution. The self is superior to other animals because of factors like physical aspects and social aspects. The self is believed to have evolved from apes and has shared characteristics with other living animals, particularly the hominids. Hominids have 1/3 size of human brain, lack of spoken language, bipedal but lack of mobility. On the other hand, self has larger brain capacity, better mobility, uses language, and uses symbol for communication. The second perspective is culture entity. Culture is traditionally defined as systems of human behavior and thought. This covers all customs, traditions, and capabilities of humans as they function in the society. In other words, cultures are those complex structures of knowledge, beliefs, arts, religion, and etc. Culture is symbolic. Geertz defines culture as a historically transmitted pattern of meanings embodied in symbols, a system of inherited conceptions expressed in symbolic forms by means of which men communicate, perpetuate, and develop their knowledge about their attitudes towards life. This embodiment of symbols of cultural elements describes attitude and create the vocation to discover new things. Culture, therefore, is learned and is very much integrated in one's custom and beliefs. People must be on guard that culture can be adaptive or maladaptive. Adaptive culture means they want to preserve key central values, while maladaptive culture is they want to get rid of cultural practices that extinguish their good identity. Enculturation takes place when culture is transmitted to another generation. It is done through observation, use of language, adaptation, rituals, and etc. Every member of the community will then distinguish themselves from other communities because of the differences in the way people do things in their lives. The self and person in contemporary anthropology. The anthropological self takes a holistic dimension of the individual person. It considers both the biological and environmental aspects of a person. The genetic component plays significant role in cultural development of an individual, while genes of a person are necessary for enculturation. Anyway, environmental exposure is a vital component of the cultural self. Contemporary anthropologists suggest that environmental exposure starts during conception. Growing years of a child is very crucial in anthropological perspective. This is the time when the child develops the psychological construct of dependency or independency. In many Western cultures where independence is cultural emphasis, the child is usually provided with a room and is trained to be independent. On contrary, in most parts of Asia and Africa, children are reared in close contact with parents, especially the mother, thus developing the dependence on significant others and the immediate community. Those practices are the key to the development of the neuromotor functions of the child, and this neuromotor circuitry is fundamental in the formation of study shows that self-awareness is conceptualized much earlier by children sleeping with parents. In anthropology, self-awareness is defined as permits to assume responsibility for one's own conduct, to learn and how to react to others, and to assume a variety of roles. Stimulation is maximized when the child is in close contact with the mother. It develops the neural circuitry. Following the process of enculturation and self-awareness, is the importance of attachment of positive values to oneself. The identity is further intensified by a practice common to all culture, the naming ritual. Naming individualizes a person. It gives a person his or her own unique traits, experiences, personality, identity, and status. The person's name is also a symbol of one's status in the community. It either gives you honor or stigma. The self that bears the name continues to establish an identity of the name in the community. In order to strengthen the identity of the self, one must be able to grasp the different behavioral orientation. The first one is object orientation. The self must learn about the world of object other than his self. He must know to position the self in relation to the surrounding objects. Example, the Tiboli. They learn to respect the trees, the lakes, the falls, and animals of the forest. Spatial orientation provides the self with personal space in relation to other people. It is, however, important to note that self must be able to keep personal space. It would be deviant behavior to any community when a person intrudes the personal space of the other. Temporal orientation shows the self with the sense of time. In Filipino philosophy, time is seen spherical, where life events are repeated but may not be necessarily the same. This is particularly true in rural communities where only the self of very few people are involved. In urban communities where time is essential, the self must be able to adjust this temporal orientations provide self with the grasp of accepted norms in the community. For example, being on time is a generally accepted norm in communal activities. In communities where punctuality is considered a value, being on time is already a charitable gesture. Likewise, normative orientation is at the same time providing the self an idea of behaviors which is not acceptable in the community.
The self embedded in culture. First, when the self already distinguishes what is acceptable behavior and what is not, it only follows that the self is already able to recognize the differences of oneself and the other. Next is, managing the differences between self is what makes the self embedded in culture. Psychological anthropologist recognizes the thin line that distinguishes the actual self to the cultural self. The actual self. Actual self is pertaining to the self-concept, which is our feelings, thoughts, intelligence, or etc. Cultural self. Cultural self means the awareness of how culture has influenced the self, and few of those are the beliefs, social relationships, and belonging to the group. The claim of the self as embedded in culture can only be embraced first, when the self recognizes its relation to everyone else. Second is, the complexity of cultural identities of peoples, things, and events should be recognized and respected by the self. The third one is, individual self must remain reflexive of the similarities and the uniqueness or the differences. And lastly is, maintaining his or her solid reflexive identity in relation to everything and everyone else. Anthropology recognizes the movement in understanding the plurality and multiplicity of thoughts, beliefs, convictions, and practices. Anthropological movement recognizes the power of culture in influencing the little gaps and interstices. When the self already recognizes the power of culture constituted by every system, then we can have an effective shaping of social reality. The example of this is the attitude of the indigenous people, especially the IP students enrolled in big universities, where they do not want to be recognized as IP. This may only means that these students are not part of their cultural identity, and this may lead to cultural degradation. Cultural degradation. What is cultural degradation? Cultural degradation or the cultural genocide is the loss of particular culture due to assimilation or loss of interest. Due to continuous growth of globalization, the culture continues to lose through genocide, violence, inability to respect, belief, and community sense of pride. In other words, globalization is one of the largest reasons why there are cultural degradation. Like for example, we the Filipino believe in mga kasabihan, but eventually little by little is being disregarded due to some scientific basis.
Thank you for listening, and always remember, sabi nga ni Norman King, you must embrace yourself to go further in life. To God be the glory.